Good morning. I'll spare you my pronunciation of Arabic since I'm taking lessons. My teacher told me it would be easier to teach everyone else to speak English than Arabic. As you know, as most of you know, I produce the Islamic Top 500 every year for The Banker and the Financial Times. Today happens to be the day where we put all the numbers together. So when I leave here, I'll be over there till well after midnight doing that. I would like to first really thank you for giving me the privilege for expressing my views on Islamic finance. And I'd like to start by telling you a story of what happened to me earlier this year. I was invited by a group of my friends from the Middle East to climb Mount Sinai and spend 6 days living in the desert and crossing it on camel. And when we were at the base of the mountain, people told us that as you go to the top of the mountain, there are things to eat and drink, but it gets very expensive the higher you go in altitude. And knowing that, we provided the right provisions. Now, climbing the mountain in the dark for 7 hours, we stumbled across a lot of pilgrims making their way to the top, both Christians and Muslims, all working together to get to the top. And there were people who hadn't quite planned their journey out very well and didn't have enough food to eat or things to drink. And we started sharing our things with them. And as we finally got to the summit, just in time for dawn, we realized that we had almost no food left for ourselves. And we decided to go to the local person selling things there, and I decided to purchase a Mars bar for the equivalent of 12 pounds British, which was probably the most expensive Mars bar on the planet. But the debate ensued between the group of us was this exploitation or was this convenience? And it started to have me think. One group of my friends said, no, don't buy the Mars bar because they're exploiting the situation. And the other group said, no, they're providing us with a convenience, and there's a fee for that convenience. And I thought this was at the heart of a wonderful debate. And so I encourage everyone, if you want to have this debate, go to the top of Mount Sinai. It's a great setting for that. So I decided today to kind of put some things together to really look at what is the underlying value proposition of Islam, and are there things that are altering that value proposition through the modern society itself? So everyone knows these things, but the key thing I want to focus on is that there is a fundamental difference between the time value of money, which is profit, or monetary value of time, which is interest. And I think that's really at the heart of this underlying debate. So I put together what I think is the value proposition for Islamic banking and finance. It's based on two things: a set of underlying principles, which acts as the cohesion that holds it together, and a set of philosophies. And the philosophies provide us with the context in which to hold those principles. But as I started thinking of this in the modern context, and looking at this debate between exploitation and convenience, I started to see a new value proposition emerge. And this is sort of an indulgence on my part. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But I started to see the value proposition is really a perceived value, an underlying value for money, convenience, which could be construed as the modern implication to this, and then an adherence to principles and beliefs. So I think the emerging value proposition for Islamic finance looks a little bit like this, where it takes some underlying principles and puts them into the context of modern society. What I started to think about was, are there some underlying things to what I'll consider moral character? And I came up with these 5 things, which I think are at the heart of the debate. One is moral knowledge. And I think in the industry itself, we need more education, both to people providing banking services and to our customers. We need to have them understand what is our value proposition. The socialization aspect of moral character is really understanding the forces that are altering society today and how we react to those. Empathy. Empathy is understanding the context, the role of Islamic finance in a multicultural society. Autonomy is the ability for us to interpret the rules and apply Sharia principles to best serve all parties involved. And a dimension of moral judgment, which is the fidelity and compliance to the rule brought forth by the free will of taking ownership of oneself to a moral compass. And I think that is at the heart of our debate, is do people have an inherent moral compass in modern society? So I'll take, very briefly, I'm going to look at three underlying factors that are shaping this debate. One I find is socioeconomic forces. We see globalization and disintermediation changing the world. It's also changing the societies to which we live. Globalization is having an impact in that people are seeing mass media communications, television, the internet, and asking questions. I want to buy that product. I want to live that lifestyle. I want to go these places. So what I see is, instead of us trying to figure out how to avoid these things, as people in the industry, we should meet them head on. We should understand how to leverage these things to get our message out of what Islamic finance is, what it means, and what our underlying value proposition is. The other thing is to understand the relativity of the value equation. My example here is, this is a receipt for a cup of coffee at Starbucks in New York City. To a 25-year-old banker in New York, $3 for a cup of coffee is fine, it's normal. But to a banker in Kenya, $3 for a cup of coffee is inconceivable. It should be about 20 cents. So what we have to realize is that our value proposition is relative to the community to which we serve. And that's, I think, the power of Islamic finance, is the fact that it is interpretive, and its value proposition can span a multitude of moral compass. The final thing that I want to just leave you with is understanding this relativity of the value equation. One thing my students in Cambridge ask me all the time is, are diamonds valuable? People will say yes because they're rare. They're not rare. I mean, De Beers and the industry put out 130 million carats every year. Every woman I know has one or wants one. They're one of the most common stones in the world. But society and the economics of society have told us that diamonds are valuable, but they're not. So what we have to understand is society influences our value proposition and our interpretation of that value proposition. And I'll leave you with one final thought. Since I do a lot of historical research on banking and finance, we have this big debate in conventional finance right now about moral and ethics and behavior and what I call the fidelity of banking. And I show this to a lot of bankers, both Islamic finance, people in Islamic finance, and regular bankers. And I say, look at this. The current branch manager's handbook talks about know your customer, understanding the characteristics of customers and having knowledge of how that customer behaves and where they got their money from and all of that. And this is at the heart of what I call the ethical debate within banking today, rebuilding the trust of banking. And I asked them to tell me, where did I get this passage from? And they all say, well, this is the new, know your customer regulations and all that. No, in reality, I got this from the Lloyd's Bank Branch Manager's Handbook of 1874. We've known about how to act and be moral in banking documented for well over 100 years. But what's happened during the course of the last 50 years is somehow we've lost our moral compass. And with that, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my views with you. Thank you.